The rain came down in sheets across the Northumberland moors, turning the narrow road into a river of mud, and Alexander Hartwell, the Duke of Ashworth, found himself stranded in a village so small it did not appear on any of his meticulously kept maps. He had not planned to stop here. His journey from Edinburgh to his ancestral seat in Yorkshire was meant to be swift and uninterrupted, a straight line across the backbone of England, driven by the cold efficiency that had defined his life for the past 7 years. He was travelling to inspect a disputed boundary line on the northern edge of his estate, a tedious matter of tenant rights and ancient charters that his steward had been urging him to address for months. The storm, however, had other intentions. The wheel of his carriage had cracked against a stone hidden beneath the floodwater, and now he stood in the doorway of the only structure in the village that showed any sign of life, a stone building with a weathered sign that read, "Thornwick Schoolhouse." The door creaked open before he could knock. A woman stood there, perhaps 50 years old, with silver-streaked hair and the kind, tired eyes of someone who had spent decades in the company of children. She looked at his fine coat, his mud-splattered boots, and the carriage listing in the road behind him, and her expression shifted from surprise to practical concern. "Your Grace," she said, because of course she recognized him. Everyone in these northern territories knew the face of the Duke of Ashworth. His family had owned land here for 3 centuries. "Please, come inside. The storm will only grow worse before it passes." Alexander stepped across the threshold, water dripping from the brim of his hat onto the worn stone floor. The schoolhouse was a single room, warmed by a fire crackling in the hearth and lit by tallow candles that cast dancing shadows across the walls. He expected to find it empty. Surely the children had been sent home when the storm began, but instead, 2 children sat on a wooden bench near the fire, their heads bent together over something cupped in their small hands. They looked up, and Alexander forgot how to breathe. 2 pairs of eyes turned toward him, eyes that were not brown or blue or green, but a striking shade of deep amber, flecked with gold. The exact color of his own eyes. The exact color that stared back at him from every mirror in Ashworth Hall. The exact color that had been a mark of the Hartwell bloodline for 10 generations. Twins. A boy and a girl, perhaps 6 years old, dressed in simple but well-mended clothing. The boy had a smear of mud across one cheek. The girl had a ribbon in her hair that had come loose and now dangled over her ear. They had not noticed him yet. They were too absorbed in whatever treasure they held. "What is it meant to be?" the girl asked, her voice carrying the serious, deliberate tone of a child examining something of great importance. "It's a shield," the boy replied, equally serious. "Mama carved it from the branch of the great oak tree. She says the oak remembers everything. She says it remembers the night of the blue moon, when a knight met a lady who knew the names of all the stars." Alexander felt the floor shift beneath him. The night of the blue moon. 7 years ago, there had been a night when the moon had risen full and rare, the second full moon in a single calendar month, the kind old country stories claimed carried strange luck. He had been 23 years old, newly come into his title after his father's sudden death, crushed beneath the weight of an inheritance he had never wanted. And at a masquerade ball held in the gardens of a country estate, he had met a woman. She had worn a gown the color of midnight, and a mask of silver feathers that covered only the upper half of her face. Her hair had been dark as shadow, pinned with small pearl combs that caught the moonlight. She had been standing alone at the edge of the gardens, watching the dancers, as if she were a painter studying a scene she would never quite capture on canvas. "You do not dance," he had said. "I do not know anyone here," she had replied, her voice low and warm, with a trace of a Scottish accent. "And I have always believed it is better to dance with someone you know than to stumble through the steps with a stranger. Then allow me to introduce myself." She had placed a finger against his lips, stopping the words before they could form. The touch had been light as a breath of wind, and yet it had sent something electric through his entire body. "No names," she had said. "Not tonight. Tonight, I do not want to be who I am. And I suspect neither do you." He had not told her his name. He had not told her his title. Instead, he had told her something he had never told anyone else. His middle name. The name his father had given him in secret. after a great-uncle whose story had haunted the edges of his childhood. Lord Stirling Hartwell had been the younger brother of Alexander's grandfather. A man of considerable intellect and even greater courage, he had fallen in love with a merchant's daughter, a woman of common birth with a sharp wit and an unshakable spirit. When the family forbade the match, Stirling had refused to yield. He had married her publicly and without apology, and the Hartwell family had responded by striking his name from every record they controlled. His portrait was removed from the gallery. His inheritance was revoked. His very existence was erased so thoroughly that, 2 generations later, almost no one remembered he had ever lived. Almost no one. Alexander's father had remembered. On his deathbed, he had called his 15-year-old son to his side, and spoken words Alexander had never forgotten. "Stirling," his father had whispered, his voice already growing thin. "I gave you his name as your middle name. Not for the world to know, for you to remember. He was the best of us. He chose love over pride. Remember that. When the time comes, choose love." Alexander had been 15 years old. He had not understood what his father meant, but he had never forgotten the name or the story behind it. And on the night of the blue moon, standing beneath an ancient oak with a woman whose name he did not know, he had offered that secret name like a gift. "My name is Stirling," he had whispered, and she had smiled as if he had given her something beyond price. "Stirling," she had repeated, as if tasting the word. "It suits you far better than whatever name you wear in the daylight." They had danced. Not the formal, measured steps of the ballroom, but something slower, something private, beneath the branches of the oak tree. She had told him about the stars. She knew their names, their stories, the myths that different cultures had woven around them for thousands of years. Her father had been an astronomer at the University of Edinburgh, a brilliant man who had fallen from favor after publishing work that contradicted the established theories of his superiors. He had died 2 years before, leaving her with nothing but a collection of star charts and a deep, abiding love for the night sky. "Look," she had said, pointing upward. "There. Do you see it? The constellation they call the stag. In the old stories, it was a prince who was transformed into a deer to protect him from his enemies. He carried the stars on his antlers so that even in the darkest forest, he would never lose his way." Alexander had looked at the stars, and then at her, and for the first time in his life, he had understood what it meant to feel found instead of lost. He had told her about Stirling Hartwell, about the great-uncle who had been erased for choosing love, about his father's dying words. "Choose love," he had repeated, and the words had felt heavy with meaning. He was only beginning to understand. And then, as the first light of morning began to creep across the horizon, she had kissed him. It was the kiss of someone who was memorizing a moment, pressing it into her soul like a flower between the pages of a book, so that she could carry it with her forever. "When you look at the stars," she had whispered against his lips, "remember that somewhere, someone is looking at them too, and thinking of you, of the man called Stirling." He had fallen asleep beneath the oak tree, exhausted by emotion and the long night. When he woke, she was gone. He had searched. God, how he had searched. He had questioned every servant at the estate, described her to every guest who had attended the masquerade, but no one had known who she was. No one had seen her arrive. No one had seen her leave. It was as if she had been conjured from the moonlight itself and had dissolved back into it when the sun rose. His mother had found him in the gardens, still searching. "Stop this foolishness," the Dowager Duchess had said, her voice cold as the marble floors of Ashworth Hall. "Whatever common creature you entangled yourself with last night, she is gone, and it is for the best. You have responsibilities, Alexander. You have a legacy to protect. You cannot afford to chase phantoms." He had never stopped searching, not really. For 7 years, he had carried the memory of that night like a splinter beneath his skin. Small, invisible to others, but a constant source of pain. He had never married. The young ladies paraded before him at London balls were pale shadows compared to the woman who had taught him the names of the stars. And now, in a schoolhouse in a village he had not known existed, he was staring at 2 children who were discussing the story of the blue moon as if it were a fairy tale their mother had told them 100 times. What? Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. Is your mother's name? The girl tilted her head, studying him with the fearless curiosity of a child who had never been taught to fear strangers. Why do you want to know? The boy, more cautious, put a protective hand on his sister's arm. Mama says we shouldn't tell strangers our names. I am not a stranger, Alexander said. I knew your mother, a long time ago, on the night of the blue moon. The twins exchanged a glance. Then the girl reached into her pocket and pulled out the object they had been holding. She held it out to him. It was a piece of polished oak, no larger than a child's palm, carved into the shape of a shield. And on its surface, etched with careful, loving precision, was a stag's head surrounded by 7 stars. Beneath it, in letters that time had worn smooth but had not erased, was a single word. Sterling. Alexander took the crest, his hands trembling. He had seen this design before. He had seen it in the oldest part of Ashworth Hall, in a forgotten corner of the family gallery, on a shield that had been pushed behind the others, as if someone had tried to hide it. The shield of Sterling Hartwell, the great uncle who had been erased. Your mother, he said, and his voice broke. Her name, please. The girl looked at her brother again. Some decision passed between them. Then she turned back to Alexander and spoke. Elena, she said. Her name is Elena Thorne. The world tilted. Alexander reached out and gripped the edge of a wooden desk to steady himself. Elena. He had never known her surname. She had never given it. But the name Elena had echoed in his dreams for 7 years. And your names? He asked. The boy straightened his shoulders, a gesture so like Alexander's own that it made his chest ache. I am Julian Arthur Sterling, and this is my sister, Cassia Thorne Sterling. Sterling. She had given them Sterling, the secret name he had shared with her beneath the stars, the name of the great uncle who had been erased for choosing love. She had not hidden his children from the world. She had hidden them in plain sight, wearing his secret name like a shield. And in doing so, she had unknowingly restored the name of the ancestor who had been erased for doing exactly what they had done, choosing love over bloodline. Where is she? Alexander asked. The schoolmistress stepped forward. Your Grace, Elena Thorne is our village midwife. She lives in the cottage at the edge of the moor, near the old standing stones. But I must ask, what business do you have with her? She has lived here quietly for 6 years. She arrived when the twins were barely a year old, with nothing but 2 infants and the clothes on her back. She has delivered half the babies in this village, and asked for nothing in return, except enough to keep food on her table. Whatever claim you believe you have, I will not see her hurt. Hurt? Alexander repeated, and the word came out broken. I do not wish to hurt her. I wish to understand why she disappeared, why she never told me, why she has been raising my children alone. Mrs. Hartley went very still. She looked at the twins, at their amber eyes, so like the Duke's, and understanding dawned on her face. Follow the road, past the village green, until you reach the standing stones, she said quietly. Her cottage is just beyond them. You cannot miss it. It is the only one with flowers in the windows. Alexander turned toward the door, then stopped. He looked back at the children. Julian was watching him with cautious curiosity. Cassia was watching him with something that looked almost like recognition. I will come back, he said. Cassia considered this. Mama says promises are easy to make and hard to keep. Your mother is right, but I will keep this one. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his signet ring, the Hartwell crest, the stag and stars. He pressed it into Cassia's small hand. Hold on to this for me. It is proof that I will return. Cassia looked at the ring, then at him. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. All right, we'll keep it safe. Alexander walked out into the fading rain, the wooden crest still clutched in his other hand, and began the journey toward the standing stones. The cottage was exactly where Mrs. Hartley had said it would be. It was small, no more than 3 rooms, Alexander guessed, but it was well kept. The stone walls were covered with climbing roses, their pink blooms heavy with rainwater. The windows held small pots of flowers, lavender and rosemary, and something yellow that he did not know the name of. A vegetable garden stretched along one side. Chickens scratched in a small yard enclosed by a low stone wall. A grey cat slept on the windowsill. It was not a grand house. It was not even a comfortable house by the standards of Ashworth Hall. But it was a home. Anyone could see that. Alexander stood at the gate for a long moment, unable to make himself move forward. 7 years. For 7 years he had imagined finding her again, but now that he was here, all of his rehearsed words had deserted him. The door opened. She was there. Elena Thorne stood in the doorway, a basket of herbs in her hands, her dark hair loosened from its pins and falling around her shoulders. She was older than she had been at 21. There were lines at the corners of her eyes now, and a weariness in the way she held herself. But she was still beautiful. Still the woman who had haunted his dreams. She saw him, and the basket fell from her hands. Herbs scattered across the doorstep. "Alexander," she whispered. He had not told her his name that night. He had told her only Sterling, but she knew. She had always known. "You knew who I was," he said. "That night. You knew I was the Duke of Ashworth." "Yes," she said. "I knew." "Then why?" The question tore out of him, raw and painful. "Why did you leave? Why did you not tell me about the children?" Elena stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside. I will tell you everything. But come inside. The neighbors will talk if they see the Duke of Ashworth standing at my gate, and I have spent 6 years trying not to be noticed." Alexander followed her into the cottage. The interior was cozy. The main room served as kitchen and sitting room combined, with a hearth at one end and a wooden table at the other. The walls were covered with children's drawings, drawings of the standing stones, drawings of the chickens, drawings of a tall man in armor with stars around his head. The knight Sterling. Elena saw him looking at the drawings, and her expression flickered with something, pain perhaps, or regret. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair by the hearth. "I will make tea, and then I will tell you the truth, all of it." She moved around the small kitchen, with practiced efficiency, filling a kettle and hanging it over the fire. Her hands were steady, but Alexander could see the tension in her shoulders. "I did not plan to be at that masquerade," she said, her back still turned to him. "My father had died 3 months before. He had been an astronomer at the University of Edinburgh, a brilliant man, but he made enemies by publishing work that contradicted the established theories. They stripped him of his position. We lost everything." She poured boiling water into a teapot. "I was 21 years old, alone in the world, with no money and no prospects. The only skill I had was midwifery, which I had learned from my mother before she died. I was traveling south, looking for work, when I met a woman, at an inn, who offered me a temporary position at a country estate. She said the family was hosting a masquerade ball and needed extra help. I arrived that evening and was given a maid's uniform, but one of the guests, a young woman about my age, took ill before the ball began. She offered me her gown. She said, 'Put it on, pretend to be someone else for one night. No one will know.'" Elena turned, carrying 2 cups of tea to the table. She sat down across from him. "I should have refused. I was there to work. But I was tired. I was grieving. I wanted one night of pretending to be someone else." "So you went to the ball?" Alexander said. "I went to the ball, and I met a man who was also pretending to be someone else." She looked at him. "You told me your name was Sterling. You did not tell me you were a duke, but I knew. Everyone in this part of the country knows the face of the Duke of Ashworth. I recognized you the moment I saw you." "Then why did you—" "Because you looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. Not because of my title, because I had none. Not because of my connections, because I had none. You looked at me as if I mattered. No one had ever looked at me like that before. I did not want it to end." Alexander stared at her. The anger he had been nursing for so long began to crack, and something else began to seep through. Understanding. "What happened after I fell asleep?" he asked. Elena's hands tightened around her teacup. "I was going to wake you, but before I could, a woman found me. The Dowager Duchess. She had been watching you all night. She found me as I was gathering my courage to wake you." She told me that you were already betrothed to the daughter of a marquess. She told me that the contracts had been negotiated for 2 years. She told me that any hint of scandal, any suggestion that you had been involved with a commoner, would destroy the alliance and ruin your reputation beyond repair. Elena's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She told me that if I ever contacted you, if I ever tried to claim any connection to the Ashworth name, she would ensure that no reputable household would ever hire me. She would write to every agency in London and Edinburgh. She would destroy me, Alexander, and she had the power to do it. Alexander felt cold settle into his bones. I was never betrothed. There was no alliance. She lied to you about everything. I know, Elena said quietly. I found out 6 months later. I was living in a rented room in Edinburgh by then, working as a laundress, saving what little I could. A gentleman staying at the house left behind a newspaper from London. It mentioned that the Duke of Ashworth remained stubbornly unmarried and had declined 3 advantageous matches. I realized then that your mother had lied. She set down her teacup, but by then, I was nearly 5 months pregnant, and I had no way to reach you that your mother would not intercept. I would have believed you, Alexander said. Would you? Elena's voice was gentle, but the question cut deep. Think carefully, Alexander. You were 23 years old. Your mother controlled every aspect of your household. Any letter addressed to you would have passed through her hands first. Any woman arriving at Ashworth Hall, claiming to carry the Duke's child, would have been turned away at the gate. Alexander was silent. He wanted to argue. He wanted to insist that he would have found a way. But the truth was, he did not know. He had been a different man then, weaker, more uncertain, still desperate for his mother's approval. I tried to write to you once, Elena said. About 2 months after I discovered the truth, I wrote a letter explaining everything. I addressed it to you personally, and marked it as private. I paid a messenger to deliver it directly to Ashworth Hall. What happened? 3 days later, I received a reply, not from you, from your mother. She wrote that if I ever attempted to contact you again, she would have me arrested for extortion. She enclosed a letter from a solicitor, a real solicitor, with a real seal, threatening legal action. She said she had already begun documenting my unstable character and delusional claims. She said no court in England would take the word of a penniless laundress over that of a duchess. Elena's voice trembled slightly. 2 days after that, the owner of the boarding house where I worked dismissed me. She said she had received a letter warning her that I was a woman of questionable morals. She would not even give me a reference. I was 21 years old, pregnant, alone, and suddenly unemployed, with a legal threat hanging over my head from one of the most powerful women in England. Alexander felt the weight of her words settle over him like a shroud. His mother had not just threatened Elena, she had acted on those threats. She had used her power to strip Elena of her livelihood, to isolate her, to terrify her into silence. I did not know, he said, his voice barely audible. Elena, I swear to you, I did not know any of this. I know you did not know. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were rough from years of work, but her touch was warm. I do not blame you, Alexander. I never did. I blamed your mother. I blamed the world that gave her so much power, and me so little. But I never blamed you. Why did you give them Sterling? He asked. The children. Why did you give them that name? Elena smiled, and it was the saddest smile Alexander had ever seen. Because I could not give them Hartwell. That name belonged to your mother, to a world that would never accept them. But Sterling was the name you chose to share with me. You told me about your great-uncle that night, about the man who was erased for choosing love, about your father's dying words. Choose love. Do you remember? I remember. When I discovered I was carrying twins, I thought about that story constantly, about Sterling Hartwell, about a man who gave up everything because he loved a woman the world said he should not love. And I thought, if our children cannot carry the name Hartwell, they will carry the name Sterling. They will carry the name of the ancestor who understood that love matters more than bloodlines. Alexander looked down at the wooden crest still clutched in his hand, the stag and stars. The name Sterling, the symbol of a man who had been erased for the crime of loving the wrong woman. Do you know what this crest is? He asked. I found it in an old heraldry book, Elena said. In a library in Edinburgh, when I was pregnant and could not sleep. I was looking for information about the Hartwell family. I wanted to understand who you were, even if I could never see you again. And I found a reference to a cadet branch that had been discontinued. The Sterling Hartwells. There was a sketch of their crest. I copied it from memory. Elena? Alexander's voice was thick with emotion. Sterling Hartwell was my great-uncle. He was erased from the family records for marrying a woman of common birth. His portrait was taken down. His name was struck from the lineage. For 2 generations, no one has spoken of him. Except my father, on his deathbed, who told me to remember, who told me to choose love. He held up the wooden crest. And now, 7 years later, I find that the woman I loved, the woman I have been searching for all this time, has been keeping his memory alive. You gave our children his name. You carved his crest for them. You preserved the legacy that my family tried to destroy. Elena stared at him. I did not know. I thought it was just an old story. It is an old story. But it is also our story. He set the crest on the table between them. I am not here to take the children from you. I am not here to disrupt the life you have built. But I want to know them. I want to be part of their lives. Elena's eyes glistened with tears. They are your children, Alexander. I never meant to keep them from you forever. I did not know how to bridge the distance between the life I had built and the life you could offer. I did not know if you would want them. I did not know if you would want me. Want you? Alexander reached across the table and took both her hands in his. Elena, every time I looked at the stars, I thought of you. I have been living half a life, and I did not even realize it until I walked into that schoolhouse and saw 2 children with my eyes, and your courage. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was a promise. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know how we will navigate the distance between Ashworth Hall and this cottage, between the world of dukes and the world of village midwives. But I know this. I am not letting you go again. Whatever comes next, we will face it together. If you will let me. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly she smiled. It was the same smile he remembered from that night beneath the oak tree. Knight Sterling, she said softly. I think I would like to get to know him. The real him, not just the stories. That night, after the children had been put to bed, Alexander and Elena sat by the fire and talked. Elena told him about the birth of the twins, a difficult labor that had nearly killed her, attended only by a village midwife who had taken pity on a stranger. She told him about the desperate struggle to earn enough money for food and shelter, the nights she had stayed awake sewing by candlelight while the babies slept. She explained why his investigator had never found her. After receiving his mother's threatening letter and losing her position at the boarding house, she had fled Edinburgh entirely. She had travelled south, using her mother's maiden name, Thorne, and had never registered the children under Hartwell, or even Sterling, in any official record. She had moved twice, before settling in Thornwick, a village so small and so remote that it appeared on no map that mattered. The wooden crest was the only document of their heritage, and it was not something any investigator would ever find. Your mother's letter frightened me more than I can say, Elena admitted. She had already proven she could reach me. She had already cost me my employment. I believed that if she found me again, she would follow through on every threat. She would take the children. She would ruin me. So I made myself invisible. And yet I found you, Alexander said. You found me because of a storm and a broken carriage wheel. Fate, perhaps. Or luck. Or the blue moon finally keeping its promise. Alexander reached across the space between them and took her hand. We have found our way back, and I am never letting go again. The next morning, Alexander returned to the schoolhouse. Julian and Cassia were already there, sitting at their shared desk near the window. They looked up when he entered, their expressions curious but guarded. Julian's hand moved slightly, as if to protect his sister. You came back, Cassia said. It was not quite a question. I said I would. Alexander pulled up a small chair, far too small for his frame, and sat down across from them. I would like to tell you a story, if Mrs. Hartley will permit it. Mrs. Hartley, who had been watching from her desk, nodded. "What kind of story?" Cassia asked. "A story about Knight Sterling," Alexander said. "The real story, the one your mother never told you." The twins exchanged a glance. Then they both turned back to him, their amber eyes watchful. "Knight Sterling," Alexander began, "was not always brave. When he was young, he was afraid of many things. He was afraid of disappointing his family. He was afraid of making the wrong choices. He was afraid of being alone. And because he was afraid, he let other people make his choices for him. He became the person everyone expected him to be, instead of the person he wanted to be." "That doesn't sound like a knight," Julian said, frowning. "Doesn't it? Being brave does not mean you are never afraid. It means you do the right thing, even when you are afraid. And Knight Sterling, he spent a long time being afraid. He spent years being the duke everyone expected, instead of the man he could have been." "What changed?" Cassia asked. Alexander looked at his daughter. He met someone, a woman who taught him the names of the stars. A woman who looked at him and saw not a title or a fortune, but a person. And for one night, beneath a blue moon, he was not afraid anymore. "What happened to her?" Julian asked. "The star woman?" "She disappeared. She was afraid too, afraid that the world would not accept her. Afraid that the knight's family would hurt her, and the knight's family did hurt her. His mother threatened her, took away her work, made her believe she had no choice but to vanish." Cassia's brow furrowed. "That sounds sad." "It is sad, but the story is not over. Because the knight spent years searching for her, and yesterday he found her, and he found the treasures she had been keeping safe. 2 children, a boy and a girl, with eyes the color of amber." The silence that followed was broken by Julian, who was watching him with an expression far too perceptive for a 6-year-old. "Are you the knight? Is Mama the star woman?" Alexander met his son's eyes. "Yes, I am the knight. And your mother is the star woman. And you and your sister, are the treasures." Cassia slid off her chair and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of him. She studied his face for a long moment. "If you hurt our mama," she said, "I will be very angry, and when I am angry, I throw things. Mrs. Hartley can tell you." "She has excellent aim," Mrs. Hartley supplied from her desk. Alexander looked at Cassia, at this fierce, fearless girl who had inherited her mother's courage. "I will not hurt your mother, I promise. Promises can be broken. Not this one." Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden crest. "This is Knight Sterling's talisman. Your mother made it for you. I would like you to keep it, and if I ever break my promise, you have my permission to throw this at me." Cassia looked at the crest, then at him. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That's a very small talisman. It wouldn't hurt very much. I suspect your aim would make up for it." Cassia took the crest and tucked it into the pocket of her pinafore. "All right," she said. "You can stay, for now." Julian, who had been watching this exchange with cautious reserve, nodded slowly. "For now," he echoed. It was not acceptance. Not yet. But it was a beginning. 3 weeks passed. Alexander took rooms at the village inn, a modest establishment whose owner, Mrs. Braithwaite, alternated between flustered curtsies and determined efficiency. He spent his mornings at the schoolhouse, his afternoons with Elena, learning about the life she had built, and his evenings talking with her by the fire. He was surprised to discover that he enjoyed the chaos of the schoolhouse. He had spent his entire adult life in rooms that were quiet and orderly and cold. The schoolhouse was none of those things, and he loved it. He was hopeless at gardening. He could not distinguish weeds from vegetables and had to be corrected more times than he cared to count. But he learned. He accompanied Elena on her rounds as a midwife, waiting outside cottages while she attended to births and illnesses. He learned the names of her neighbors, the histories of their families, the intricate web of relationships that bound the community together. The children were warming to him, but slowly. Julian remained cautious, watching Alexander with the same assessing gaze that Alexander himself used when evaluating a business proposition. Cassia was more open, but even she held something back, as if waiting for him to prove himself. It was Julian who finally broke the silence. They were walking back from the schoolhouse together, just the two of them. Cassia had stayed behind to help Mrs. Hartley clean the slates. The autumn sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the moor. "Why did you not come sooner?" Julian asked, his voice quiet but direct. Alexander stopped walking. "That is a fair question. I know about my mother's letter, the one your mother sent. She told us. But you are a duke. Dukes can do things. Why did you not find us?" Alexander knelt down so that he was at Julian's eye level. It was not a gesture he made often. Dukes did not kneel. But this was not about rank. This was about a boy who deserved an honest answer. "I should have found you," Alexander said. "I searched for your mother for years. I hired investigators. I questioned everyone who had been at that masquerade. But I was searching for the woman I remembered, the woman in the silver mask who knew the names of the stars. I did not know her real name. I did not know where she came from. I did not know she was pregnant. And I did not know how thoroughly my own mother had worked to make her disappear." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am not making excuses. I failed. I failed your mother, and I failed you and your sister. I should have searched harder. I should have questioned my mother. I should have realized that the reason I could not find Elena was because someone was actively hiding her from me. I did not realize that until it was too late, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that failure." Julian studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "Mama says that admitting you were wrong is harder than being right. She says only brave people can do it." "Your mother is very wise." "She is." Julian was quiet for another moment. Then he held out his hand. "I am still angry, but I am willing to try." Alexander took his son's hand. It was small and warm and slightly sticky, as children's hands always were. "That is all I ask." The Dowager Duchess arrived on the first day of October, in a carriage drawn by 4 matched black horses and accompanied by 2 lawyers. Alexander was at the schoolhouse when she came. Mrs. Braithwaite rushed in, her face flushed and her cap askew. "Your Grace," she gasped, "there is a woman at the inn. She says she is your mother. She has lawyers with her." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. He had known this moment would come. He had been preparing for it for weeks, but he had hoped for more time. "Stay with the children," he said to Mrs. Hartley. "Do not let them leave until I return." He found his mother in the private parlor at the inn, seated in the best chair as if it were a throne. She was exactly as he remembered her, tall, elegant, impeccably dressed in mourning colors. Her silver hair was perfectly arranged. Her hands, gloved in black lace, rested on an ebony cane. The lawyers stood behind her. "Alexander," the Dowager Duchess said, her voice cold and precise, "I have been hearing the most extraordinary rumors." "The rumors are true," Alexander said. His mother's mouth snapped shut. "The woman's name is Elena Thorne," Alexander continued. "I met her 7 years ago, at a masquerade ball. You found her. You lied to her. You told her I was betrothed. You threatened to destroy her if she ever contacted me. You sent her a solicitor's letter threatening legal action. You cost her the only employment she had. You drove a pregnant woman into hiding, and you cost me 7 years with my children. I did what was necessary to protect this family. You did what was necessary to protect your pride." Alexander stepped closer. "You have no power here, mother. Not anymore. Whatever common brats that woman has whelped. Do not." Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Do not speak of my children that way. Their names are Julian Arthur Sterling and Cassia Thorne Sterling. They are 6 years old. They have my eyes and my blood, and Julian will be my heir." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Your Grace, under English law, children born outside of marriage cannot inherit a title. The legal mechanisms to address this are complex and time-consuming. Even with your cooperation, we are looking at a process of months, potentially years, involving petitions to Parliament." "I am aware of the law," Alexander interrupted. "I have been speaking with my own solicitors. I know what is required, and I am prepared to pursue every avenue, regardless of cost or time. The title will pass to Julian, through whatever legal means are necessary." "And what of the girl?" the Dowager Duchess asked. Cassia will be recognized as my lawful daughter. She will have her own inheritance, unentailed property, trusts, whatever portion of the estate is not bound by the title. She will have every advantage that her birth should afford her. Alexander turned back to his mother. You have a choice. You can accept Elena, you can accept your grandchildren, or you can return to the dower house alone, and you can spend the rest of your days surrounded by portraits of ancestors who never loved you either. The Dowager Duchess stared at him. For a moment, she looked not like a formidable matriarch, but like an old woman who had suddenly realized she had lost the only power she had ever possessed. You would choose her over your own mother? She whispered. I would choose love over fear. I would choose the family I have found over the family that never truly wanted me. And I would choose to honor the memory of Sterling Hartwell, your own uncle by marriage, who was erased from this family for doing exactly what I am doing now. The mention of Sterling Hartwell's name made the Dowager Duchess go very still. What do you know of Sterling Hartwell? She asked. I know that he married a woman of common birth, and that the family disowned him for it. I know that his portrait was taken down, and his name struck from the records, and I know that my father gave me his name as my middle name, and told me on his deathbed to choose love when the time came. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden crest, and I know that Elena, the woman you tried to destroy, has been keeping his memory alive. She carved this for our children. She gave them his name. She preserved the legacy that you and everyone before you tried to erase. The Dowager Duchess stared at the wooden shield, at the stag and stars, at the name Sterling. I remember him, she said, and her voice was barely audible. Sterling Hartwell. He came to my wedding. He was old by then, in his 70s, but he came anyway. He said he wanted to see the next generation begin. He told me that one day I would have to decide whether I wanted to be feared or loved. I spent my whole life choosing fear. She looked up at Alexander, and for the first time, he saw something other than coldness in her eyes. He saw shame. I became the very person he warned me about, she whispered. Yes, Alexander said, you did. The Dowager Duchess was silent for a long moment. Then she set her cane aside and rose from her chair. Take me to them, she said. The children, please. The meeting took place in the cottage. Elena stood near the hearth, her back straight, her expression guarded. Julian and Cassia sat at the wooden table, drawing pictures with charcoal on scraps of paper. They looked up when the Dowager Duchess entered, their amber eyes curious but not afraid. The Dowager Duchess stopped in the doorway. For a long moment, she simply stared at them. They have your eyes, she said at last. Yes, Alexander agreed. They do. She lowered herself into a chair near the fire, her movements stiff. Your names, she said. What are your names? Julian glanced at his mother. Elena nodded. I am Julian Arthur Sterling, and this is my sister, Cassia Thorne Sterling. Sterling? The Dowager Duchess tasted the word. Do you know who Sterling was? He was a knight, Cassia said. He chose love, even when everyone told him not to, and then the family erased him, which means they pretended he never existed. The Dowager Duchess flinched. Yes, that is what they did. But we remember him, Cassia continued with the absolute certainty of a child. We carry his name, so he is not erased anymore. The Dowager Duchess was silent for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she reached into her reticule and withdrew a small velvet pouch. She tipped 2 objects into her palm, silver pendants, each shaped like a star. These belong to my grandmother, she said, her voice quieter than Alexander had ever heard it. She was the daughter of a merchant. She married into this family against everyone's wishes. She gave me these when I was a girl, and she told me that stars are the same everywhere. They shine on dukes and commoners alike. I thought you might like them. Cassia slid off her chair and approached the old woman with fearless directness. She looked at the pendants, then at the Dowager Duchess's face. Did you know Sterling Hartwell? She asked. I did. He came to my wedding. He told me to be brave. I was not brave. I spent my whole life being afraid of what other people would think. And I did terrible things because of that fear. Are you still afraid? Cassia asked. The Dowager Duchess looked at this child, this fierce, fearless girl, who carried the name of the ancestor she had failed to honor. Yes, she admitted, but I am trying to be braver. Cassia considered this. Then she held out her hand. You can put it on me, if you want. The Dowager Duchess's hands trembled as she fastened the chain around Cassia's neck. When the clasp clicked into place, she let her fingers rest for just a moment on the child's shoulder. Julian approached more cautiously, accepting his own pendant with a solemn nod. Thank you, he said. The Dowager Duchess looked up at Elena then. I cannot undo what I did to you. I cannot give you back the years I stole, but I can try to do better, for them, if you will let me. Elena was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled. The grey cat on the windowsill twitched its tail in its sleep. I will let you try, Elena said at last, but I will not forget, and I will not pretend that what happened did not happen. I would not expect you to. Then we have an understanding. It is not forgiveness, not yet, but it is a beginning. The Dowager Duchess nodded slowly. A beginning, she repeated. That is more than I deserve. Winter came, and with it the slow, patient work of building a new life. Elena and the children moved to Ashworth Hall in November, once the initial legal arrangements had been set in motion. It was a temporary arrangement at first. Elena insisted on keeping the cottage, on maintaining a place to retreat to if everything went wrong. Alexander did not argue. He understood that trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. The house was vast, a sprawling stone edifice that had been added to and renovated over 3 centuries. But it was cold. The servants moved silently. The corridors echoed with emptiness. This is where you grew up? Elena asked, as they stood in the great hall. This is where I grew up, Alexander confirmed. I spent my childhood in these corridors, and I do not think I laughed once. Elena looked at him, and then at the children, who were exploring the hall with delighted curiosity. Then we will make it warm, she said. We will fill it with laughter. She was true to her word. She brought in flowers, even in winter, forcing bulbs in pots that she placed in every room. She rearranged furniture to create cozy corners. She encouraged the servants to speak, to laugh, to stop moving like silent ghosts, and she insisted on seeing the Sterling wing. It was a forgotten corner of the house, a small gallery at the end of the east corridor that had been closed off for decades. Alexander had discovered it as a boy, exploring the house during a rainstorm. The door had been locked, but he had found a key in his father's study. Inside, the gallery was dusty and neglected, but the walls were lined with portraits that had been removed from the main family collection. And there, at the end of the row, pushed behind the others as if someone had tried to hide it, was a shield bearing the stag and 7 stars. Beneath it, in faded gold letters, was the word Sterling. This is it, Alexander said. This is what remains of Sterling Hartwell. Elena walked slowly through the room. There was Sterling himself, a handsome man with the characteristic Hartwell amber eyes and a gentle smile. There was his wife, the merchant's daughter, her expression sharp and intelligent. There were their children, 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl, all of whom had been written out of the family records. He was not erased completely, Elena said. Someone kept these. Someone remembered. My father, Alexander said. He was the one who showed me this room. Elena turned to look at him. And now we will bring them back. These portraits. This shield. Sterling Hartwell will no longer be hidden. Alexander took her hand. You have already brought him back. You gave our children his name. You carved his crest. You preserved the legacy that my family tried to erase. Now we will make sure no one ever tries to erase it again. Spring came slowly to Yorkshire that year. The snow melted in March, revealing the first green shoots pushing through the frozen ground. The legal process moved at its own deliberate pace. Alexander's solicitors had advised that the most reliable path would involve petitions to Parliament, a lengthy process, but one that had precedent in similar cases among the peerage. There was reason to be optimistic, they said, given Alexander's standing and the absence of competing claimants. But it would take time, perhaps a year, perhaps 2. Julian and Cassia, now 7 years old after celebrating their birthday in early spring, had settled into life at Ashworth Hall. Julian had discovered the library and could often be found there, reading books far too advanced for his years. Cassia had claimed the garden as her domain, and spent hours planting and digging and asking the gardeners endless questions. The Dowager Duchess visited once a week. She was still formal, still stiff, still uncomfortable with the warmth that Elena had brought into the house, but she was trying. She brought books for Julian, and art supplies for Cassia. She sat through dinners without making cutting remarks. She was learning, slowly, to be part of a family, rather than the ruler of one. Her relationship with Elena remained cool. There were no warm embraces, no declarations of affection. But there were small gestures. A book on midwifery left on Elena's desk, a question about her father's astronomical work, a quiet acknowledgement that Elena's knowledge of herbal medicine had helped ease the dowager's rheumatism. It was not friendship, but it was something. And Alexander was learning too, learning to laugh, learning to play, learning to be present in the small moments, bedtime stories, and morning walks, and the 1,000 tiny rituals that made up a child's day. He was not perfect at it. There were days when the weight of his responsibilities pulled him back into old patterns. But he was trying. What happens now? Elena asked one evening in late spring, as they sat together on the terrace watching the sunset. Now we wait for the legal process to complete. It will take time. My solicitors estimate at least another year, possibly longer. But once it is done, Julian will be formally recognized as my heir. And Cassia? Cassia will have her own inheritance, the unentailed properties, the trust my father established, a portion of the estate that is not bound by the title. She will be provided for. She will have every opportunity that her birth should afford. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not what I meant. Will she always feel like an afterthought? A daughter who cannot inherit the title while her brother can?" "No." Alexander turned to face her. "Cassia will never be an afterthought. The title passes to Julian, because that is how the law works, and I cannot change that. But Cassia will always be a Hartwell. She will always have a place in this house. And if she wants to study medicine, or midwifery, or anything else, I will support her. Whatever obstacles society puts in her way, I will support her." Elena smiled. "She told me yesterday she wants to learn everything I know about delivering babies. She said there should be more women who understand women's bodies. She said men can study all they want in their universities, but they will never truly understand. Then she will learn. From you, and from anyone else who will teach her. She is only 7. She may change her mind a dozen times before she is grown, but whatever she chooses, I will support it." Elena leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You have become a very good father." "I had a very good teacher." He kissed the top of her head. "Sterling Hartwell chose love over everything else. My father told me to choose love. For years, I failed to do it. I let fear and duty control my life, but not anymore." He turned to look at her, his amber eyes serious. "Marry me, Elena, not because the law requires it, not because of the inheritance, but because I love you, not just the memory of you, the woman I have come to know these past months, the woman who raised our children alone, the woman who preserved the legacy I was too blind to protect. I want to spend every day of whatever time we have left proving that I am worthy of you." Elena looked at him, at the man who had danced with her beneath the stars, who had searched for her for so long, who had defied his mother and society and the law to claim his children. "Yes," she said. "Yes? Yes, I will marry you. I will be your wife. I will be the Duchess of Ashworth, though I still have no idea how to be a duchess." Alexander laughed and pulled her into his arms. "You could never fail at being anything. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met." They were married in the village church on the 1st day of June, almost exactly 1 year after Alexander had stumbled into Thornwick and discovered the children he had never known existed. It was a small ceremony. The villagers filled the pews with genuine joy. Julian and Cassia, now 7½, carried rings on small velvet cushions. Mrs. Hartley wept openly through the entire service. The Dowager Duchess sat in the front pew with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was no longer a frown. And when it was done, when they were pronounced husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers that could be heard all the way to the standing stones. That night, after the celebrations had ended and the children had been put to bed, Alexander and Elena stood together in the Stirling gallery. The portraits looked down at them from the walls. Sterling Hartwell and his merchant wife, their children, the legacy that had been hidden away for 2 generations. "We should bring these into the main gallery," Elena said. "They have been hidden long enough." "They have," Alexander agreed. "I wanted you to see them first. I wanted you to understand what you have done. You gave our children the name Stirling, because you thought it was a fairy tale, but you were restoring the legacy of the only Hartwell who ever had the courage to choose love over pride." Elena looked up at the portrait of Sterling Hartwell. The kind eyes, the gentle smile, the amber gaze that had been passed down through generations. "I think he would be proud of you," she said. "I think he would be proud of both of us." Alexander wrapped his arms around her. "We have done what he did. We chose love. And we have brought his name back into this house." The legal process took 18 months. It was a complex matter. Petitions to Parliament, sworn testimonies, documents signed and sealed and witnessed. Alexander's solicitors worked tirelessly, and in the end, the act was passed. Julian Arthur Stirling was formally recognized as the lawful heir to the Dukedom of Ashworth, and Elena Thorne Stirling was granted the full rights and privileges of a duke's daughter. Their names were entered into the Hartwell lineage, and the Stirling name was preserved within them. The Dowager Duchess attended the ceremony in London. She stood beside Elena without flinching. When the formalities were complete, she said, very quietly, "It is done." It was not quite approval, but it was acceptance. The years that followed were not without their difficulties, but they were filled with far more joy than sorrow. Cassia grew up to follow in her mother's footsteps. She studied midwifery and herbal medicine, learning first from Elena and later from physicians in Edinburgh who were willing to teach a woman of determination regardless of her sex. She returned to Yorkshire to practice among the villages where she had grown up, and she was known not as Lady Cassia, but simply as Cassia Hartwell, the woman who had delivered half the babies in the county and asked for nothing in return from those who could not pay. Julian grew into his role with the quiet dignity of a boy who had been raised on stories of a knight who chose love. He was thoughtful and serious, always aware of the privilege he had been given, and when the time came, he proved to be a good duke and a better man. The Dowager Duchess lived to see her grandchildren grow. She and Elena never became close friends. The wounds of the past were too deep for that, but they reached a place of mutual respect. In her final years, the Dowager confessed to Elena that she had spent decades protecting a legacy that had nearly destroyed everyone she claimed to love. "I was wrong," she said, her voice frail. "About you, about everything. Stirling tried to tell me, all those years ago. I was too proud to listen." "You are listening now," Elena said quietly. "That is what matters." When the Dowager Duchess died, she left her personal collection of jewelry to Cassia and her library to Julian. To Elena, she left a single item, a letter, written in her own hand, apologizing for the harm she had caused, and thanking Elena for raising children who had restored the heart of the Hartwell family. Elena read the letter once, then she folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box where she kept the Stirling crest. It was not forgiveness, not completely, but it was peace. On a warm June evening, many years after their wedding, Alexander and Elena sat on the terrace of Ashworth Hall and watched the stars emerge. Their children were grown now. Julian was away in London, attending to his parliamentary duties. Cassia was in the village, delivering a baby that had chosen an inconvenient hour to arrive. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the cold, empty quiet of Alexander's youth. It was the peaceful quiet of a home that had been filled with love for decades. "Look," Elena said, pointing upward. "There, the stag. Do you remember?" "I remember everything," Alexander said. "Every word you spoke, every star you named. I carried that night with me for 7 years. It was the only light I had, in all that darkness." "You do not have to carry it anymore. You found your way home." Alexander wrapped his arms around her. "You showed me the way, you, and the children, and an old story about a man who chose love and was erased for it. We all found our way together." Elena leaned against him. "Legacy," she said quietly. "We used to think it was a title, a house, a bloodline, but it is none of those things. It is the stories we tell, the love we give, the names we choose to remember. Julian and Cassia will carry that legacy, and their children after them. The name Sterling will not be erased again. He kissed her then, beneath the stars, on the terrace of the house that had become a home, and the stag looked down from the summer sky, carrying the light of 1,000 distant suns, watching over the family that had finally learned what it meant to choose love. In the main gallery of Ashworth Hall, in a place of honor, hung the portrait of Sterling Hartwell and his wife, restored at last after 2 generations of hiding. Beside it, in a glass case, lay a small wooden shield, carved from the branch of an ancient oak. On its surface, worn smooth by the touch of small hands, were a stag, 7 stars, and a single word, Sterling. And beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "In memory of Lord Sterling Hartwell, who chose love over pride, and of Elena Hartwell, who preserved his legacy when all others had forgotten. May we always remember." If you believe that a name can carry a legacy, and that love can restore what was lost, leave a like and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the only inheritance that truly matters is the love you choose to leave behind.